In the third portion of my talk, I'm going to be talking about how an analysis like the one I presented briefly in part 2 is fitted within a typologically diverse system of syntactic analyses. So remember, we looked at an analysis of Slavic style, Russian style, multiple fronting, and the goal was to go from a surface sentence such as the first line in example 4 here through some kind of syntactic structure to a correct semantic representation, such as this one. Now, what we would like is to make this more accessible to the broader community, because not everybody is working within the specific HPSG formalism. For instance, not everybody even is a formal syntactician, and yet a variety of people ranging from linguists to NLP researchers may be interested in the semantic representations, such as this one, for example. And so I am working with the grammar matrix system, which I will present in the next slide. But here I will introduce it by this snippet from the questionnaire. This is a typological style questionnaire, which elicits typological information from the linguistically informed user. So the user is supposed to have some opinion, some hypothesis, you might say, regarding how WH questions, as one example, are formed in the language for which they wish to obtain an implemented grammar. And so in this case, for example, if I want to obtain a grammar for Russian, I can simply make a choice that in Russian, all question phrases can be fronted. And so what I want is to go from this to these kinds of structures being mapped to surface sentences. So I want to skip the portion, this syntactic tree portion altogether from the user perspective. I don't want to have to construct this representation myself and to encode this analysis myself. I want to rely on some kind of stored analysis, which perhaps will have to be customized based on this kind of specifications. So that is precisely what the grammar matrix is for. It's a meta grammar engineering framework. Meta in the sense that it can create multiple grammars given different typological descriptions. As input, you take a specification such as this one here, but for many phenomena, for multiple syntactic phenomena. And so the system takes as input this kind of specification. It will be machine readable, of course, and then it uses some amount of core HPSG types and stored HPSG analysis, such as the analysis of multiple fronting that I showed to you, to perform some kind of customization on those stored analyses and output the customized grammar which suits the particular typological specification that was the input. So that's the idea behind the grammar matrix. And this output grammar is an implemented Delphin style grammar, which will be able to parse and generate sentences in this language. There are quite a few syntactic phenomena which are already supported by the system. You can see a full list here. And all you need to do is fill out each portion of this questionnaire. It doesn't take too long, apart from maybe the morphology portion that can take a longer time, and lexicon, but the lexicon can be imported automatically. And then all you need to do is click on, just click here, and you will obtain a grammar which will hopefully work, but of course it's software, so there may be bugs, which if you try this, you're welcome to report to us. So how does one develop a new library? These things here are matrix libraries. I added this one in my recent works. In my dissertation, I added this library here. Previously, I added this library, and I know quite a few of people who contributed here, and then some of this was before my time. So anyway, how does one develop a matrix library? This is just some Python code, right, which supports the customization of the stored types given specifications. And the stored types, because HPSG is fully explicit, we can just encode the HPSG hierarchy and store it. Crucially, the questionnaires which elicit the typological information, their design is based, of course, on surveying typological literature. So, for example, when I was putting together the library for WH questions, constituent questions, I read what's out there on the typology of constituent questions, and I designed the questionnaire accordingly. We evaluate all new stuff that we add to the system. We evaluate on what we call held out languages. I will talk about this later, but it's basically languages which we were not thinking about during development. And as we develop libraries, we grow what I like to call regression testing base. So as I work on developing the typological questionnaires, and then as I work with specific language data, developing analyses for that data, and then after that, as I work on the general picture of how I like to map typological specification to customized grammar output in general, so all those sensible typological combinations, what should I do with them? As I do that, I store the test suites and what I consider gold output. I store that in the system so that it can be rerun at any point to check how any small change in the analysis, in any of the analyses, affects all of the gold output that was stored, right? Is the system still giving me the right output for all of the languages, not just the ones that I work with? So the latest edition, the Constituent Questions Library, of which I presented you with one sample analysis in part 2. I wanted to just state what constitutes, I think, the research question of this kind of work. So the research question in my case was not simply how do I analyze Russian fronting in HPSG. It was more generally on the one hand, and maybe more specifically on the other hand, what constitutes a model of a range of typologically attested ways of forming constituent questions within the given grammar matrix framework. And the framework, unfortunately, is important. I will talk about it at the end of this section. And we evaluate, like I said, we want to evaluate how well do the analyses of this range of phenomena that I looked at, how well do my analyses generalize to a set of randomly picked languages which I haven't looked at before. So the typological scope of the Constituent Questions Library includes not only fronting, but also, crucially, languages which use morphological marking on the verb to form a constituent question, a very, very common strategy in the world languages. Question particles, a very, very common strategy to form constituent questions. And then, of course, I needed also to create types for question words themselves, lexical types, and store them in the system. So that's the sort of full scope of my dissertation work. And I just want to show you a few tables. The point of it is not for you to read them, but I just want to illustrate with these tables what it takes, or what does it mean to assemble these typologically diverse analyses into a single system. So you have here in the leftmost column, the sort of typological, the abbreviated typological label for a language. Single obligatory fronting, for example, matches English, the English language in terms of question forming, constituent question forming. English obligatorily fronts one question word. Then we have multiple obligatory fronting, such as in Bulgarian, etc., etc. So this is a typological description. It's abbreviated here. And then here I list the HPSG types, which are pertinent to the analysis of this typological profile, of this point in typological space. And the fewer types are affected, the better. The simpler the analysis, the more elegant the analysis. Now, here in the grammar matrix, we distinguish between the core types and the non-core types. Let's not dwell on this too much, doesn't matter. What I think matters most is whether the type is new or not. Whenever the type is new, it means I had to write it from scratch and to add it. Whenever it's not new, it means I was able to reuse something that was already established in the system. And it's very good when I can do so. It's very good to not have to add and invent new types. So this kind of gives you an idea. But sometimes, of course, you need to add a new type. And then customized features, this, again, the fewer the better. The fewer features we had to customize for the new analysis, the more elegant the analysis. And you can see that some languages are easier to model elegantly than others. And so if you had the crazy idea of going and reading my dissertation, you would see that I have similar summary tables for question particles, modeling those type of languages, and for modeling morphological marking. Now, I want to say just one thing about morphological marking. Look at, so there's two types of languages here which mark questions morphologically. Some of them use the same morphological paradigm, inflection paradigm, to mark polar and constituent questions. And there are languages, they're not very common, but there are languages which use separate paradigms. One to mark polar questions, yes, no, yes or no questions, and another paradigm to mark constituent questions. And look at how I had to use twice as many types here as here. This is what I hinted at when I said that it's kind of not trivial to combine an elegant analysis of fronting with an elegant analysis of morphological marking in the same system. And I cannot go into much detail here of why that is. It kind of has to do with the core. It has to do with certain assumptions that we make about how we represent lexical rules, etc. But, and with no local features. I mentioned the no local features before. So it's easier to handle non-local features in fronting languages a certain way, but then you have a harder time handling those non-local features in lexical rules here. So that was an interesting typological tension, which probably has a lot to do with the specific formalism that I'm using, but it's worth investigating nonetheless. So to evaluate, the development is of course frozen, and then I grabbed some reference grammars from language families which I didn't use in the development, and I didn't look at examples from those language families at all. And then I grabbed all examples of constituent questions in those languages which I could find. And I filled out my new updated grammar matrix questionnaire, and I clicked create a grammar, and I ran the grammar on the examples, and I obtained coverage and overgeneration. So the percentage of examples that the grammar actually covered and gave correct semantic representation. That's crucial. It's not just some parse tree. It's a correct semantic representation. And then overgeneration of which is the percentage of ungrammatical examples parsed. So this is to answer this question: how well can my system, my updated system with new analyses, handle examples from an unseen language? And these are the results. I don't give you the overgeneration figure, but it exists. And you can see that I used several languages from several language families. The test suites are relatively small. That's because I focus on, well, that's both because there aren't necessarily texts in these languages available, but even where there are texts, it's because I focus on the syntactic variation, not lexical variation. So I don't really need lots of lots of different sentences for this task. And you can see that coverage ranges from 50% to 85%. And that's because many of the analyses that I put together worked fairly well. And then there were phenomena which I simply did not anticipate because they did not occur in the typological review. And funnily enough, the stuff that I demoed to you earlier, showed to you earlier, the multiple fronting and the long distance dependencies, that did not even come up in evaluation, as it happens. Not such a common typological phenomenon. There are some bugs which I identified which have to do with the direction that I want to go in next, of reanalyzing some of this in terms of information structure. So to summarize part 3 of my talk, this grammar matrix tool facilitates grammar creation for a variety of languages, and after I finished the work on the constituent questions library, we can now obtain larger grammar fragments for a wider variety of languages. And this is it for part 3, and part 4, I promise, will be shorter. And it will just be about what I think is next for me in this direction. Thank you.